May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So we're approaching the end of our church year. Next Sunday is our celebration of Christ the King, which is our last Sunday in our church year. Does anybody know how you can always tell we're coming to the end of the church year? There's something that we hear at the end of every church year, and we heard it this morning already. Any idea? At the end of every church year, we get several weeks of these apocalyptic type of readings. We heard it this morning in Daniel. We heard it this morning in the Gospel of Mark. In fact, that little section we heard of chapter 13 from Mark's Gospel is called the Little Apocalypse. Now, apocalypse is a little problematic. It's problematic for preachers because we don't really know what to do with it. You know, we're not sort of Chicken Little people running around, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And I think it's particularly problematic for Episcopalians because we look at these readings and say, well, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? What good is this to me in my life of faith? What am I supposed to take away from these readings? But also as Episcopalians, we always read the Bible in context. And I think it's really important when we come across readings like this that we do read the Bible in context. There's several ideas among scholars about when the Gospel of Mark was written. Some people say it was written somewhere in the late 60s CE. Some say it was written after the year 70 CE. Now 70 CE is a really important turning point. Does anybody know what happened in 70 CE? The temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. See, the person who answered the question this morning had been in EFM too. So a little plug for EFM. If you want to know really interesting biblical theological things, take EFM. But the Jewish-Roman War lasted from 66 to 70 CE. And in 70 CE, the Romans actually burned down the temple. Now, how do you burn down a temple built of stone? What they actually did was they stoked fires around the base of the temple. And they stoked them, and for 3 weeks, they stoked these fires until they were so hot, the stone cracked apart, and the building crumbled. It was an absolute devastating time for the Jewish people. All that's left of the temple is what we call the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, and people still go there today to pray. They put notes of prayers in the wall. But the very center of their life had just been destroyed. The temple was the cultural center, the religious center, the social center, the economic center. I'm not sure we even have something like that in our life, in our country, that would hold the same sort of symbolism and life as the temple held for the Jewish people. And so that's a really important date to understand, because whenever we have apocalyptic literature, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, there's always a few things going on. The people are always suffering. And the reason that we get this looking forward to the future of what God will do is because the people are suffering now and they're thinking the future has got to be better than the present. So let's look forward to the time when God will come. God will strike down the unrighteous. God will lift the righteous up, and all will somehow be better. So you can see that if you were a Jew around year 70, 72, or even a little bit before that during the war, you were in a time of profound change and suffering. And so writing this way makes a lot of sense. There are those who try and take this type of literature literally. There's probably some of our fellow Christians in the Santa Clarita Valley who try and take these readings from the Bible literally. They're problematic to take literally. This morning in Mark, he says, there will be famine, there will be war, nation will rise against nation. Well, good grief, that happens all the time. That's been happening since humanity started. But there are those people who will take these readings and the book of Revelation, and they will try and date individual things. And if you're not paying attention, the Mayan calendar ends in about a month, and the world's going to be over anyway. So maybe it's a good thing we're reading these things right now. You've probably seen some of those cartoons on Facebook or other places where it's got two Mayans saying, well, what are they going to do when they find out we just ran out of stone? I mean, or if you get on Google and you Google the end of the world, there's lists and lists and lists of dates. And they just go by, and most of the time we don't notice them, and somebody goes, oh, well, the world was supposed to end. Well, it didn't. This type of rhetoric and literature comes all the time. And you can see if you're trying to take the Bible literally in this way, it's really problematic. But even if we understand the context, even if we realize that this type of writing signals a time of suffering for the people who lived during that time, the question that comes back for us as contemporary people and Christians is, what does this have to say to us? How can we take what we heard here this morning away with us and make some sense of it for our lives, for our life of faith? There has to be a reason for us to hear it in church. The lectionary writers don't just put it out there for no reason. And so I was thinking about this week. I've been traveling a lot of the week to Baltimore for a conference, and so I had long stretches of time on the airplane to think about life and the Bible and those kinds of things. And there was a song that kept coming to me as I was reflecting on our lessons this morning. So Christina, my audio engineer, is going to play part of the song for you. I suspect that most of you will recognize it.
Said I was in my early 40s with a lot of life before me, when a moment came that stopped me on a dime. I spent most of the next days looking at the x-rays, talking about the options and talking about sweet time. I asked him when it sank in that this might really be the real end. How's it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what'd you do? And he said, I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Blue Manchu. And I looked deeper and I spoke sweeter and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. He said I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't. And I became a friend would like to have. And all of a sudden going fishing wasn't such an imposition. And I went 3 times that year, I lost my dad. Well, I finally read the good book, and I took a good long hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Blue Manchu. And I looked deeper and I spoke sweeter and I he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. Like tomorrow was a gift and you got eternity to think about what you do with it. What did you do with it? What did I do with it? What would I do with it? Skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing. I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. Man, I loved deeper and I spoke sweeter and I watched an eagle as it was flying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. 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 To live like you were dying.
So, what does Tim McGraw have to do with the Gospel of Mark? Most of you probably heard that song. For me, the question it invites me to ask is, what does it take to shake me out of my complacency? What does it take to get me to do something a little differently? What does it take to get me to be that person that I want to be, the person God is calling me to be? I think part of the reason we hear these readings each year is the church is inviting us to this reflection of what do we need to shake us out of our complacency? Do we need to think the world is going to end? Do we need some devastation? You might all remember, I was in Boston on 9/11, and our church was packed for about 3 weeks or a month. And then, what does it take to get us to live like the person we want to be? Like the person God is calling us to be? And the truth is, so often it's so simple. It takes a phone call. It takes an invitation to lunch. It takes a checking up on somebody that you know is having a hard time. It doesn't take a lot. So I invite you to ask yourself that question. Where can you be a better friend, a better spouse, a better parent, a better companion or teacher or coworker or wherever you find yourself in life? What do you need? A little encouragement? Hopefully not something terrible happening in your life to remind you of what is important. Maybe it's just a little time. So take that time. Be that person that you want to be. Amen.